Welcome ladies and gentlemen, my name's Dychronic, your host here on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of my new favorite PvP Stasis Warlock builds in Destiny 2. In a nutshell, this build is built around the Warlock's melee ability, which is a orb projectile that you throw from your hand, goes around 5 meters, and completely freezes any enemy that it touches, including enemy supers, allowing you to shut down that enemy and just shoot them down with your weapon. Combine this with different things that it can increase the regeneration rate of your melee abilities, including Monte Carlo, or the different bonuses to melee ability regeneration across the entire Stasis subclass, as well as the different armor mods, and you can pretty much have a melee ability on every interaction, which again allows you to just completely shut down the enemy, allowing you to easily shoot them down. And of course, thank you to my buddy Zoomzy for helping me make this build, as well as get the gameplay you can see in the background right now. A link to his Twitch will be left in the description down below if you want to check out more of his PvP gameplay. Moving on, let's go ahead and get into the specs of this build. For the class and subclass, obviously it's going to be a Warlock Stasis Shadebinder. For the aspects, there are only two options, Iceflare bolts and Frostpulse. I assume when we get new aspects, we're going to want to replace Frostpulse, as it's not really that great of a perk and it only gives you one fragment slot. For the fragments, which you can have 4 of, I like to use Hedrons, bonds, refraction, and shards. Depending on what grenade you pick, you might want to change out shards for Durant. For the rest of the subclass, I like Coldsnap grenade, the Penumbral Blast melee, Healing Rift, and Burst Glide. As for the weapons, this loadout and build is going to be based on using Monte Carlo, Felwinter's Lie, and the Interference 6. Monte Carlo is going to be the most important part, as has a number of bonuses to getting your melee back very easily, very quickly, either from damage or from killing enemies with it, on top of having damage bonuses, being a 600 RPM auto rifle, and having exotic tier stats. Alternatively, you could go with the Traveler's Chosen side of things, get your melee and your grenade back in that way, but Monte Carlo is a bit faster and more focused on melee. For the energy weapon, either a shotgun or a sniper will work depending on what you like to use, and finally the heavy is completely up to you. I just like having grenade launcher. And finally, the armor mods, oftentimes the most sophisticated and important part of any build. On screen right now you can see how I personally optimize my build based on my stats and my armor. You are obviously going to have to make changes based on the stats that you need, and more so on this build than most other builds, these stats are going to be very important. Getting that 9 recovery, the 7 strength, and the 5 resilience above everything else is going to be very important, and then follow that by getting some of the mods you can see on my optimization. Most of the things should be pretty obvious, just a couple notes along the way. First of all, the exotic choice, the Claws of Amkara for that additional melee, is very useful for the overflow charging, allows you to on average get more melees per match, and combined with the Monte Carlo, you'll accidentally overflow charge, getting an extra melee. You're going to want that overflow charging. And more so than that, none of the other melee-based exotics really work with this build, as you're not really getting melee kills, you're meleeing an enemy and finishing them off with your auto rifle. For Charge with Light, the first focus again should be on those stats. Getting the Powerful Friends and Radiant Light for their plus 20 mobility and plus 20 strength is going to be the most important part, and because they're both Charge with Light arc mods, they actually trigger off of each other, even if they're on different armor pieces. If you read the tooltip, these two can actually trigger off each other. Following that, then go for the higher energy fire plus taking charge, and then after that, if you can fit stacks on stacks, that's even better. But Charge of Light is not a huge or critical part of this build at all, it's just an extra bonus on top. Up next, let's talk about the gameplay, because how you use this build is oftentimes just as important as how you build it. To reiterate a few things, this is an aggressive build based on using your freezing melee ability in almost every interaction to easily kill enemies that can't move. It's a simple premise, but it's very easy to pull off and does not hinge on a lot of tight requirements. Basically, when you see an enemy throw your melee ability, they will freeze in place, and then you finish them off with your Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo will then give you melee energy back and a chance to instantly charge it on kills. If you don't have a melee charge, then you can just use your Monte Carlo to deal damage and get your melee back quite quickly. Up next, I wanted to talk a bit more in detail about your subclass, what pieces are important, how you use each piece. First of all, there are 2 aspects for the Warlock currently. We're using both of them. The Iceflare bolts that give you grenade energy and a cold snap trigger on shattering a frozen target. So literally every target that you freeze, then kill, sends out a cold snap to freeze nearby enemies. And the other one is Frostpulse, that gives your Rift cast a freezing effect, which in my opinion is really not that great of an effect and only gives you 1 fragment slot, whereas the other one, the better one, gives you 3 fragment slots, which really does confuse me. The fragments that I've chosen for this build, firstly we have Hedrons for bonus weapon damage from freezing enemies, bonds for super energy from killing a frozen target, refraction, which gives you class ability energy from killing frozen or slowed targets, and shards for boosting grenade recharge rate when shattering stasis crystals. Your super is also a very strong part of this build, as because it has great mobility and range to it. The best way to use it is going to be using that light attack to freeze targets and the heavy attack to finish off all the frozen targets in the area with a very generous AoE. Your grenade, which is the Coldsnap grenade, is used in place of your melee attack whenever you don't have melee ability energy. And finally, your healing rift is used normally as a defensive option and also gives you melee energy with outreach, so try to use it as often as possible. Next up, let's talk about your weapons. Your primary weapon, Monte Carlo, is used in close to mid-range. It's a very good primary use weapon with its superior exotic tier stats, its damage perk, and its melee-based bonuses that work well with the build. Your special weapon, Felwinter's Lie, is still incredibly strong in this current meta where snipers have been nerfed and works well in close range with your melee. And finally, your heavy weapon, a good grenade launcher, is chosen for its in-between ability of ease of use and potential kills. And one of the most important parts you need to understand about this build is how to counter it, because if you understand how to counter it, you know how to play around it. Now, the biggest counter are going to be things that avoid your melee ability. Things like high mobility enemies, hunter jumps, lateral sprinting, and long range. Be sure to play within your range needs, which in most maps in the game, you have the ability to reapproach from another angle. And the very last thing I wanted to talk about in this video are going to be the alternatives. And there are a few alternatives to your weapons in Subclass. Firstly, you can use a different weapon than I outlined above as long as it has something like Wellspring or some type of melee recharge bonus. Just make sure you make the appropriate mod changes to your armor. Your subclass cannot be changed as this build is built around the subclass's ability and there are no other stasis options. Your rift and jump can be switched to anything that you want. Your grenade can be switched to Duskfield and selecting Endurance Fragment in place of Shard. Your exotic is not really a critical part of this build and can technically be switched to something like Transversive Steps if you want more speed. No other melee-based exotic really fits the build as you rarely get any melee kills. Things like Karnstein Armlets or Necrotic Grip really wouldn't help as it depends on getting melee kills. This build is melee, then kill with your gun. And that is going to be pretty much the end of the video. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions, concerns, what you thought of this Warlock build, or if you have a better version of a Stasis Warlock build, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll try to work on a Hunter Stasis build very soon, and I realize that I'm not really doing these very quick, but I did want to take the time to understand Stasis and figure out where they're going and give you a good build that can be used for a long time. But yeah, that's going to be the end of it. Hope you guys did enjoy. My name's Dychronic, and I'll see you guys on the next one.